Welcome, William.
Nice to be back. Thank you.
William has written 9 books. At 22, Xanadu was a bestseller. How did you manage that?
One of my lucky breaks has always been that I can't do anything else other than write. I have other friends who have never been able to choose between being bankers or ballet dancers, choristers or champion jockeys or whatever. I've only ever been good at one thing, which is writing, and it's always it's given a clarity to my life, which otherwise might not have existed. And I always knew I'm innumerate, I can't add up, so I was never going to make it in business or in finance. I can't turn up on time anywhere, so I'd never made it in a
You made it here?
You sent a car for me. I can get into a car. So it's just as well that I've got this one thing I can do, and I think I'm quite an extrovert, sociable, frivolous guy.
Interesting, because somebody wrote about you saying that you come across, which I agree with, as gregarious, great fun, socializing everywhere. But then your books belie that whole image.
Well, what I have is a capacity to lock down. And these books, I mean, Return of a King is an enormous great lump of 600 pages and 6 years' work.
There's some serious research.
There's a wee bit of research in here. And
British understatement.
In the final...
It's all research.
It's all research. In the final year, when I've accumulated all this material, done all the reading, filed it all, got it all into order. It's rather like Chinese cooking would be my analogy, that you spend years preparing all the ingredients, but the actual cooking process is concentrated and intense. That unlike a tandoor where you let it marinate and cook over a long period, with Chinese cooking you use boiling hot oil and then suddenly throw all your ingredients in and it's ready in a relatively short time. And that's how I write. I spend 5 or 6 years on one of these big history books. The first couple of years is general reading. Next couple of years is detailed archive research. The final 9 to 11 months, depending on the size of the book, is writing. And during that period, I totally lock down. I never go out to lunch. I don't go out to dinner more than once, maybe maximum twice a week. Whole periods of 2 weeks will pass and I don't leave the farm. And at that period in my life, I get up at 5:30. I have by my bed, before I go to sleep, a printout of the chapter up to that point. And I sit out on the terrace from 5:30 till about 7:30, going through the chapter, correcting it. By 8:30, the corrections are into the computer. I'll have a run, and by breakfast and...
Did you say you run?
I do actually run, I'm ashamed to say. Not very far, but I do actually take exercise. Particularly this time, I find it's very important if you're in real, serious, intellectual lockdown to...
Do some physical.
Do some physical, otherwise you just go to seed. So, and then I'm the new writing of the day from about 9:30 till about 2:30 in the afternoon. And that is, I do it in a garden shed outside the range of internet, so there's no distraction. I lock my BlackBerry in the top drawer in the house, and I don't reply to any mails before 2:30. And that way you get this concentrated period between about 5:30 in the morning and 2:30 when the day's real work takes place. And it's unbroken, it's concentrated, it's intense. After that, answer the phone, go shopping, hang out in car market, and if you've got any energy, maybe go out in the evening. Usually at this period, when I'm actually doing the final writing, 1 year in 4, 1 year in 5, generally go and just sit in front of a BBC DVD of some old Dickens or something.
But William, that's a very short period of writing for
Correct.
a day. It's only 9:30 to 2:30. You do that because that's how you stay fresh?
Yes. It has
because
to be,
some people write for 9 hours, 12 hours.
I would envy anyone that can, but for me, it's just 4 or 5 hours. Then in the evening, there's a second period when it's again correcting and again preparing the stuff for the next day, printing it out, getting it all ready. But the actual new writing, the 2, 3, maximum 4 pages a day that I write during that period will be between 9 and...
How did you come to this, that this is how you should work?
Just how I've developed. I mean, everyone develops their own technique, their own way. And I am, I'd say, during that 1 year in 4 or 5, I am super disciplined. Last year, as chance to have it, I was also doing an exhibition in New York of Mughal art, and there was Jaipur. So I think I had less sleep and worked harder last year than I've done at any period in my life before. It was a really Well, it was very stimulating, very exciting year, but it was a hard year.
What I see is that with so much research from various sources, some in other languages which need to be translated, then you have this massive material. Then it would be, I would imagine, a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, where then you plan that this is where I will bring this in, you know.
As you're working on it, I'm always doing a sort of general plan, which I'm annotating and adapting. And I'm knowing from quite early on the rough shape of the book, as in a very general way. But I am absolutely meticulous and anal in my research, in that as soon as I get back to my desk and bring the stuff in from wherever I brought it, I have 4 or 5 card indexes by name, by topic, by place, by chronology, and then on the computer I have a date line, which grows up in a book like this to about 300 pages. I've done it for all 3. I mean, this is part of a trilogy. White Moguls opens it, Last Moguls closes it. It's the story of the East India Company and how they interacted with India and with Afghanistan during this period. And the 3 of them together, they actually only cover 50 years of history. White Moguls, which is the story of this love affair in Hyderabad, 1795 to 1805. Last Mogul, 1856 to 1858, the mutiny in Delhi. This one, 1839 to 42, in between the 2. And characters wander between those 3.
But this is more Afghanistan and the other 2.
Yes, but it's a war run out of Calcutta. It's fought by Biharis, Bengalis and Lucknowis. The main characters are people like Ranjit Singh. It's an Indian book.
Yeah.
It's emphatically an Indian book. It's the story of this forgotten Indian expedition to
I kind of see you
Afghanistan.
as somebody who's playing with toy soldiers all the time.
It's not really me. I'm not a military history buff. This is verging on military history, but it's very political.
And how do you get, because you must bring in your own sort of take on things, in the sense of how do you gauge their emotions? You know, there's a lot of emotional stuff, descriptive stuff that happens in your book.
The kind of history I really enjoy reading, which is the kind of history I attempt to write, is very biographically based. It's very interesting because India has such a strong tradition of history writing in academia. But in India, history is regarded really as part of the social sciences. It's regarded as part of, the great Indian historians like Irfan Habib or Ranjit Guha are doing, Irfan's doing agrarian studies of the Mughal Empire. Ranjit Guha is doing, subaltern peasant uprisings, and it's very much economic and social history. What I'm coming out of is a completely different tradition, which doesn't get so much airplay here, which is the tradition of history as literature, the tradition that Gibbon was writing in, that Macaulay, Lord Acton, more recently heroes of mine like Sir Stephen Runciman, Linda Coley, Mayan Jasnov. Simon Sharma is perhaps the best known of them. His book Citizens brought back modern history writing to narrative, to biography. And
it is more storytelling.
Well, the word history has embedded in it the word story. And traditionally, history was the telling of stories about the past. That is what it is. Now, just like there are many ways of writing a novel, there are many ways of writing a history book. And I'm not saying my way is any better than any other way. But there is this tradition which I love, which is using the tools of literature to retell history. Traditionally, the novel only has existed since the 18th century. And today we look almost exclusively to the novel to understand human character, to penetrate the human heart, to tell the workings of the interior. But in the 18th century, people looked first to the history book. A work like Gibbon explained the world to the 18th century. And I think people have forgotten how history can be in the hands of a master. I'm not saying for a minute I'm a master, but
you're a good storyteller.
It's certainly the tradition I admire and would love to be working towards and in. Of using history to do the things that you expect from the novel today. A tightly written narrative, written in beautiful English, with clear and gorgeous writing, which unravels the mystery of the human heart and unravels the mystery of how humanity operates, and that plays between politics and economics and war and love, but to do it in non-fiction and to work on your prose with as much effort as any literary novelist would do. As I say, I'm not saying I'm achieving this, but this is what I'm aiming at and hoping for.
No, and there's a problem in non-fiction in the sense that in contemporary non-fiction, you can't do that with people who are still alive, writing about their emotions, because many of them would object that, no, I didn't feel that way.
Well, what you're doing, I mean...
But you have the advantage that they're all dead.
But I'm not like a novelist sort of saying, you know, Emily Eden may have been thinking at this point, or Emily went to her room, and everything is based on letters or diaries. I'm nowhere sort of turning fiction writer.
Because there's a lot of emotion in the book.
That's because the 18th century and the early 19th century were such fabulous letter and diary writers that we can reclaim their thoughts from their diaries. And so if ever I'm describing someone's thoughts, it's only because they've written it in their diary. And this is the great thing we're going to lose. I mean, historians of the future will, I mean, unless, you know, we all give out our hard drives and people's BBM messages and internet or texts are going to be used by future historians, and all their flirtation over BBM or something will be preserved for the future. We will lose that because we do not write the same sort of letters that the 18th century sat down. When Emily Eden was miserable on arrival in Calcutta, she'd write a 6-page letter to her sister in England describing her thoughts. And suddenly you have this window opening, and there you are in the Governor-General's house in 1837, and Emily Eden's just arrived. Lord Auckland is deciding whether to invade Afghanistan or whether to invade the Opium War, and you're there in the room with them. She says, George is sitting over the other side of the room. Poor, dear, peaceful George has gone to war. Such an inconsistency in his character. And so suddenly you have, you know, what is distant political history, the pure good fortune that you have these fantastic writers writing their diaries, writing their letters, recording their thoughts, enables you to construct a human narrative out of this period in a way that would be very difficult in another. And I mean, what I love about this war is that, as well as having the perfect narrative arc of a good story, in essence, this is the story of an army of 18,000 Indians marching into Afghanistan and one man coming out to tell the tale. That is a wonderful premise to begin a story. Because the incredible amount of letter writing that goes on both sides, because the Afghans are also fantastic chroniclers and autobiographers, you can reconstruct the whole thing, and in a way that's impossible in most of history. Suddenly, you know, the evidence is there. Here are these human beings in this situation. You can follow them in. At
many points, you expose the extreme cruelty of the British.
And the Afghans. Yes. No one behaves well in this book.
But in India, there is still a kind of a veneer that people believe that the British are fair and just people, although they were quite cruel here as well, but a lot of that is glossed over. Have you been called a traitor by the British?
I think we're quite used to, I mean, my generation of writers in Britain, I'm hardly alone in this, have been busy writing both the good and the bad of empire. We were born long after the empire disappeared. We're not paid up propagandists for it. I certainly wouldn't regard myself as a paid up sort of hatchet job writer either. I mean, I'm interested in trying to get to the truth, and there are individuals in this book who behave well and nobly and with selflessness and cleverly. There are an amazing number of people there who behave foolishly, idiotically, cruelly, badly, and carelessly. And this is a story which obviously has enormous contemporary resonance of a war which was totally unnecessary. Rather like the Iraq War, intelligence is manipulated in order to create a war for a group of hawks who see it as part of their self-promotion. These right-wingers in Calcutta want to be one ahead of Russia. The background to this is the British have been moving up the Ganges, absorbing Delhi, and now posed at Ludhiana. The Russians have been moving south from the Orenburg line, are now looking greedily at Bukhara, Samarkand, Khiva, the Central Asian Khanates. Everyone can see these two empires are going to meet in the middle in the Hindu Kush. And so both sides are sending up young officers as spies, working out different ways of how they can conquer and map and understand this vital high roads in between. Afghanistan is the strategic crossroads. If you control Afghanistan, you can get from Persia to Iran, from Iran to China, you can get from Central Asia to India. Anyone that holds this holds the key. And so these hawks manipulate intelligence. About a single Russian envoy's trip to Afghanistan, which is like the yellow cake or the weapons of mass destruction.
And you've mentioned that, you know, it happens in Iraq, and the parallel of what is happening in Afghanistan today.
That's
what
the great
happened
miracle.
then.
That's the
and
extraordinary
also
thing.
you've mentioned that Karzai belongs to the same tribe, and the areas are the same, and the Taliban also belongs to the same tribe that were fighting at that time. Remarkable coincidences or remarkable historical
Well,
facts?
I don't think it is coincidences. I think what you have is
It's
historical
extension.
geography is the same. The human geography is the same. So when an invading force comes in, they are going to choose you have the same thing happening. I mean, the parallels which I thought at the beginning when I began working on this book and which attracted me to this story, which I thought were just general, turned out the more you go into the detail to be more and more specific, more and more remarkable, rather than less, which is what you'd expect.
But you said that the West has not learned from history. Neither have we.
No one's learned from
But
history. Yeah.
I
There's
have
that famous dictum by Edmund Burke that those who do not study history are destined
to
always
repeat
to
it.
repeat it.
But I have another proposal. I submit to you that the West has learned from history, and it is because it's economically advantageous to do exactly what they did then, to repeat it.
I don't agree. I mean, I think what was interesting was that Tony Blair and George Bush were two historically illiterate men. As recently as the 1950s, there was a tradition in Britain that, leave Afghanistan well alone. When Sir Harold Macmillan was handing over the keys of Downing Street to Sir Alec Douglas Hume in the 1950s, Hume is alleged to have said, "Sir, do you have any advice to me as I enter office?" And Macmillan said, "My dear boy, as long as you don't invade Afghanistan, you'll probably be okay." And this sort of folk wisdom that you just don't touch Afghanistan, it's going to end in tears, was not passed on to Bush and Blair, who blundered in thinking, as everyone always does, that they can go in, affect regime change with these primitive people, and be out within 6 months.
And they've
of course
said
it
that
hasn't.
Afghanis have never allowed anyone to rule against them. The chapter in your book the passage in your book where you talk about an old Afghani coming and speaking to an American who says, "Why do you hate us?"
Shall I read that?
Yes, please.
It's this passage right at the
I
end
have
of the
it.
book. And I go to the place where the last stand of the British took place. And I come across these old men who are descendants of the guerrillas who got rid of the British in 1839. And one of them says to me, "Last month, some American officers came to see us in a hotel in Jalalabad for a meeting. One of them asked me, 'Why do you hate us?' And I replied, 'Because you blow down our doors, enter our houses, pull our women by the chair, and kick our children. We cannot accept this. We will fight back, and we will break your teeth. And when your teeth are broken, you will leave, just as the British left before you. It's just a matter of time.'" "What did he say to that?" I asked. He turned to his younger friend and said, "If the old men are like this, what will the young ones be like? In truth, the Americans know that their game here is over. It's just their politicians who deny this. These are the last days of the Americans," said the other elder. "Next, it will be China."
That's really foreboding. You mentioned in your presentation, it's the first time I've been to a book launch where the author actually tells the story in a concise way. It was fascinating, especially with all the paintings. And your other book that you have come up with, Princes and Painters, is a remarkable collection of artwork and we'll come to that a little later. But I wanted to talk to you about your presentation. How were you so gutsy to actually give the story away and still trust that people will buy your book to read the details?
Well, the idea is that it's a taster, that they would be lured in. I mean, we'll see whether it has just incidentally today made it to #1 in the Indian bestsellers.
Okay.
So I think it was the right strategy so far.
Now,
so good.
you mentioned in your launch that the Afghanis were okay with the British coming in, but when the Afghani women started getting involved with British officers, that's when the Afghani men took to war.
Line, yeah.
And also Alexander Burns seduced Abdullah Khan Achakzai's mistress,
yeah.
and that's when the trouble began. So we're back to the old stereotype story that it's the women that started the trouble.
Well, it's not the women who started the trouble, but it's the men who got upset by
Because
the
of
women sleeping with other men. I think it takes two sexes to have an affair. You can't just blame one.
You've spoken about Christian spirituality, and you've sought to debunk this stereotypical image of India being the spiritual haven and all this. And also spoken about your Punjabi neighbors who are brutally materialistic. As we see, India is hurtling towards huge materialism as we see it. as well as spiritualism going on and new forms of new age spiritualism, as everything in India, two opposites keep developing at the same time. I wanted to ask you about your Christian spirituality. You've lived in India now how many years?
Coming on for 30 years.
30 years. Has Indian spirituality influenced you at all in any form? And what is your Christian spirituality?
Well, I should preface this by saying that I do come from a very religious family. My parents are both extremely committed Roman Catholic. My brother is a Catholic priest and my uncle is a Catholic priest. So I was brought up in a very religious environment. I am personally not particularly religious now. I was as a younger man. I'm not at all now. And yet I find that I haven't been able to cease looking at the world through the spectacles of religion. I'm very interested in religion. And when I've done documentaries with the BBC, religious units and things, you find that these sort of units are full of people like me, children of bishops and things, who themselves may not be actually at all religious anymore, but they can't stop. They're trained in a way to see the world and be interested in religion, to see the world through religious spectacles. And I do find that religion, plays a major part. The call to jihad is an important part of this book, as it was in the call to 1857. And I find myself interested in religion. I see it as one of the big motivating forces of human history. The way that people are drawn to religion, the extraordinary things they believe in, seems, along with the urge to power and the urge to sex, to be one of the motivating things. It is an important factor here and elsewhere. But again, I get very irritated by this sort of assumption that the only mysticisms in the world are kind of the great mysticisms of the East. I think Indians forget that there are these spectacular traditions of spirituality and mysticism within the Christian tradition, both in the Eastern Orthodox and with great mystical writers like Julian of Norwich, or the writer of The Cloud of Unknowing, which is very much the equal and very similar to the world of Rumi and Shams and the great Sufi mystics.
So maybe your next book would touch upon or deal with Christian spirituality?
I live here. This is my home now, and I'm very committed to India.
Is India like a junoon? What is the obsession?
Just where I live. I mean, I moved here when I was 18, and I've never really left.
What do you like about this insane, crazy, lovable, mad country?
Well, as you say, it is like all love affairs. It's particularly after you've been with your beloved for a while. You are aware. I passed the honeymoon phase, I think it's fair to say, with India. I'm aware of how irritating India can be. I'm aware of, just this morning, the electricity went in the farm, the generator wasn't working, and you had one of those incredibly frustrating mornings when nothing is working and nothing is happening, and you've got a desperate deadline which you can't service because... And at the moment, it's a blind fury with this country, but I do love it, and it does still fascinate me. I'm never bored here. And the ability, just the last 2 or 3 weekends, I'm launching this book, going down to Hyderabad and wandering around the old city and looking at the Badshahi Ashokan, eating the spectacular biryani, then going to Chennai or Bangalore and seeing the stuff there, and then a weekend in Goa. The alternative if I was living in Britain would be, driving up the M4 and staying in some damp hotel in Wiltshire. And there's just no competition. And I think, in a sense, you have to be an outsider to see something. Often, an outsider can see things that people who are born to a place can't see.
We take for granted.
When you go to London, you will see the red pillar boxes and the double-decker buses and the black London taxis in a way that I won't. They will be invisible to me.
To me, it looks like Toy Town.
Yeah.
Not East Town.
and it'll be, the outsider can see things that the insider can't. And there's so much about this country. The last few months, I climbed up to the Mani Mahesh pilgrimage, to the Kailash of Mani Mahesh, seen the Gaddis do their exorcisms. I've been to the beaches of Pondicherry and Goa. It still feels to me, I have to say, this country just fills me with fascination and love.
Do you think it could be like, it could happen that you would react like Prao Jabwala, who completely loved it and then hated it so much that she couldn't bear it for a second?
I think she had a particular personal story which was connected to that upset, and I hope I don't end up falling out of love with it for something like that. I think, I know, I mean, I would be surprised if I ever move anywhere else. And as a writer,
So
there's a great deal to be said for being here. I mean, just to forget, for a sense, the emotional story and just to look at pragmatically, very few people seem to be writing this kind of book, for better or worse. Maybe that's a good thing. But I feel that there are 9 more lifetimes of work I could do here. I go back to London, my friends suffering from writer's block, they don't know what to do. I have files groaning with ideas and just don't have enough hours in the day to get this work done.
You've had a lot of controversy in your life. And I'll quote from Open magazine, when I think it was Hartosh who wrote, "How did a white man, young, irreverent, and likable, in his first and by far most readable India book, City of Jinns, become the pompous arbiter of literary merit?" You objected to the Open magazine piece. You called it blatant racism.
I have to say that I think that my response to Hartosh was about the most stupid thing I've done in the last 5 years. It was the most stupid thing I've done in the last 5 years.
Really, why?
In that Open magazine is a fine little magazine, but not many people read it. And I managed single-handedly to transform a small column which would never have been read by more than 100 other journalists. It's true, into a major story. To have responded to that in the way I did immediately before the Jaipur Festival, it became the story of the festival. And it was completely idiotic. Anyone with any sense could and did tell me that...
No, I think you did the right thing by responding, because people do read it and they should hear your version. I disagree with that. I don't think you put it on the map. I think it was on the map and you deserved to be heard and your side needed to be said.
Well,
your version needed to be
I did
read.
respond, but for better or worse. I'd say probably for worse. But
So do you think that Indians are basically a racist people?
no, I don't. I think all nations...
Of course we are. Look at our marital ads.
Wait. I think all nations have a reaction to successful outsiders coming in and making a lot of noise. I think the reaction of the British to Indians or the Caribbean immigrants in the 1950s, the reaction of Germans to successful Jewish businessmen in the 1930s. I mean, it is a classic thing to, and I am an immigrant here. I mean, however way you look at it, I mean, I may not...
Look at the way Indians treat Naipaul. They adore him. A man who comes here is obnoxious, is rude, misbehaves with everybody, and writes, to my mind, great writing, but writes explaining the brown man to the white man. For many years, that's what he did.
Well, Naipaul is a complicated character, I agree. He's a great writer who often gets things very badly wrong. He's a difficult man personally. But India's reaction to Naipaul is more complicated than you say. I think initially he was reviled, and there are times when I remember carrying a copy of An Area of Darkness or India Wounded Civilization around with me. People would say, very bad writer doing India. And then he gets the Nobel Prize and suddenly he's India's best friend, you know, and everyone changes their tune and suddenly everyone claims him. India's a complicated place. You all love gossip. You all change your views every 2 minutes. We're all human beings.
So you embrace it. That's what it is.
India's been extremely good to me. I mean, for every nasty, irritating article by Hartosh Singh Bahl, there have been 100 nice reviews. My main readership is here now, weirdly.
So where your material?
Oh, you're certainly my material. I mean, not just exclusively you. I've written about everywhere from the Middle East, Afghanistan, and Central Asia. But India is where I live and where I write about. And as I say, I stay here because I love it. I could move tomorrow if I wanted. I mean, there's plenty of other nice places to go and be a writer. I can sit in the Caribbean for a month.
You transformed yourself from a travel writer to more serious history writing.
Yes, I mean, that happened when my children were born. In my 20s, I was a young, single foreign correspondent, was able to travel around as I wished and do all the kind of boys' own stuff that young correspondents like doing, covering the Tamil Tigers, being shot at by the CRPF in Srinagar, and covering the Intifada in Palestine, going to the Gamat al-Islamiyya heartlands of Egypt and that kind of thing. And suddenly, when my daughter was born in 1994, the urge to do that just went overnight. The urge even to travel went overnight. And for the next 10 years, I was based at home as a historian, working in libraries, And then there was a restlessness after that, and that's what 9 Lives was. I mean, by the time my daughter was old enough, in a sense, not to need me to change her nappies anymore, and I wanted to have the freedom living here to go off a bit more. And then, so I wrote another travel book after 10 years. But it's not, I mean, I think it's very useful as a writer to have a number of tricks you can play. If I was just writing history books, these things are enormous work. Very satisfying to do, and when you get in the grip of a story and you're following a trail, it's like being a detective. It is obsessive. But at the end of it, it's exhausting. And I'm looking forward now to a project which is, I want to do more art history. I really love doing that exhibition in New York. And I'm very, very much looking forward to spending a few years now. Navina Haider's asking me to co-curate an exhibition at the Met in New York on Deccan painting, a guest curate, and that kind of thing.
How do you find all this? How did you locate? Or you've located China. You've located all kinds of.
The key is, I think, just to follow your loves. If you're doing stuff you're passionate about, it's not work. It's pleasure. And yeah, I mean, what was interesting with Princes and Painters is that deals with this period, the late Mughal period, 1707 to 1857, 150 years, which have been very neglected. And there's no major collections of the art of this period in any of the public collections in India. There are bits scattered around everywhere, but never put on show as the main attraction, if you like. Everyone's very proud of Akbar and Shah Jahan. Everyone also in the later period, imperial art, and then the art of the nationalist movement. But this period's got lost in between, and so Yutika Sharma, who's my co-curator now, this is very much a collaboration, this wasn't me on my own. Yutika and I, having gone through the public collections quite quickly, then had to be locating this material in private collections around the world. You have to write letters, sales catalogues in Sotheby's, you ask them to forward it to the anonymous buyer. Occasionally you get a response, often you don't. And gradually accumulating, even before you began to work out themes.
How long did it take you to put this together?
It began, the invitation to it began the day after I launched The Last Mughal in New York. Vishaka Desai, the president of the Asia Society, said, do you want to... I showed my slides of the art of this period at the thing. She said, this is spectacular. I've never seen any of this before. We must do a show. That was 2007, and it finally got up in New York in February 2012. So it's a 5-year project.
So, do you have another book now in mind?
I do. I haven't got it focused at all in my head. But it's following this cultural and art history. There's so much out there. And the sort of thing, you have those wonderful books that were written in the 50s, like A.L. Basham's The Wonder That Was India. Now old-fashioned and a bit stodgy. I think if one was to somehow soup that up, and I like the lesser-known areas and recovering characters, forgotten characters like Burns and Macnaghten, to be able to take people that history's forgotten, who were once terribly important and who are interesting and quirky.
Of course, the most fascinating person is Lady Sale, and I was looking for. I wanted to know what she looked like. There's no painting of her?
No, there is. No, we have a painting of her in here. She is a feisty old memsahib who...
Is she pretty or is she a doggy?
Absolutely not.
She sounds pretty
She's a fearsome... I mean, memsahibs were not renowned for their beauty. They were renowned for their toughness. And she brings a grand piano up to Afghanistan, plants her kitchen garden.
That's an amazing story of how she does her games and... She's unbelievably brave. When she's in
caught in the
captivity.
ambush. Well, at first they're caught in the ambush in the Kokabul Pass, and the Afghans have killed about 5,000 sepoys in a matter of an hour. And Lady Sale coolly writes in her diary, I luckily had only one musket ball in my arm.
And then when she's in captivity, that she says that she'd rather die than have the honour of Britain. I mean, it's quite spectacular.
She's fantastic. No, they don't make them like that anymore, sadly.
Thank God. Thanks very much, William.
Thank you.